Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. I am here with Erik Aadahl and Ethan Van Der Ren, the supervising sound editors of A Quiet Place Part 2. And you were both actually Oscar nominated for the first film in the Quiet Place series. After that, your work in that film was so, often discussed. Was there pressure to sort of top yourself with this one or do something different uh, when you took on the sequel?
Well, yeah, there's always pressure for us when we're working on a follow-up or a sequel. We always put pressure on ourselves to go someplace different and to do new things because we don't want to be in the position of feeling like we're just repeating ourselves. We want to be, by nature, we always want to be growing and exploring. So I think mostly it was pressure that we were putting on ourselves. And fortunately, John Krasinski provided us, with a script that allowed us to really build on some of the themes that we established in the first movie. And so we were glad when we read the script and said, okay, we're going to be able to, explore some new territory and build on what we've already started.
And one of the things I think you did a good job building on was in the opening sequence before the aliens crash land, you really kind of play with the audience's expectations and fear of sound from the first movie with how heightened everything feels like when John Krasinski picks up things in the store. What was your sort of goal for that opening moment?
Yeah, well, it was so fun how John kind of constructed that opening also, because the audience is dropped into a scene without knowing where they are time-wise. Is this after the original movie took place? And it takes a while to figure out, no, this is actually before the events of the first film, because we start with this desolated town scene and it's quiet and you hear the little street lights tick from one color to the next and a little flagpole dinging in the distance, all these little quiet little details. And then vroom, his pickup truck comes into shot, and which is kind of jarring. And that was sort of by design intended to kind of like, okay, hang on, we're stepping back in time. And then it's all just following these little details. John's character going into the store, and you just hear him moving through reality. The TV has some ominous news in the background. We're approaching this little league game, and we kind of realized it would be so perfect for A Quiet Place Part 2 to start with no music, so we're just purely establishing the reality of this place and the rhythms of this town. And so then when we start to introduce the danger and we see, uh-oh, something's coming out of the sky, we're just amping up, and creating like as pure a sonic experience as we could, and taking the rules we'd established from the first film and concepts like the character Regan's sonic point of view, or the sonic envelope, as John called it, and just taking those all and ramping them up a notch.
Yeah.
So no music, it's just pure visceral sound design reality for the entire first reel of the movie.
Yeah, very, very visceral way to start it off. I'm glad you mentioned Regan, because Millicent Simmons is kind of one of the major evolutions of this sequel. Is she really becomes a centerpiece in a much larger way. And so we have a lot more sequences where it's told from her perspective. And I would love for you to just speak on, like, how did you find the way of, capturing what her sonic experience would be for the audience?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, this is an area that, we really started exploring in the first film. And literally on the first day that Erik and I sat down to start working on the first movie, we quickly realized that we want to experience the world through her point of view. Like, because, what a vulnerable place to come from, where you're living in a world where sound is everything. And to not have, you know, full hearing capacity puts you in such a incredibly vulnerable place. You know, we were thinking, man, this is where we want to be able to go in and out of. And so we started playing with that idea, and we quickly realized this is going to be super dramatic if we can make this work and do it in a way where we engage the audience enough that they're gonna feel connected and not be like, oh, this is boring. And that was something, you know, we really sort of had to feel our way through, and we didn't know our audience is going to be able to hang with this, you know, these stretches where we go, you know, to this muffled sound, or we go to, in a few instances, complete, you know, digital zero, no sound at all when she has her cochlear implant turned off, or she doesn't have it in place. So as we started playing with that in the first movie, she became our sort of touchstone, our North Star, really sort of guiding us through like how we are going to create the universe of sound for this world and for the movie, and to sort of drive the story forward. And you know, throughout the first film, we didn't really know until the very end, in fact, until the premiere of that film at South by Southwest Film Festival, is this going to work? Because we really didn't have any test screenings with that movie. So it was an open-ended question until the end, you know, is this sort of grand sonic experiment gonna click for people? And so, of course, when it did, we were obviously super happy, because for us, the whole time we were thinking we feel like this is, you know, really engaging, but we didn't know if audiences who are so used to, you know, scenes being drama being driven by music, and not as much being driven by sound design. And this was a instance where we sort of flipped that idea on its head and really tried to drive the story with the sound design by getting into characters' perspectives, you know, not only Regan's, but also playing with the idea of going into the perspective of the creatures, you know, who obviously are blind but have hypersensitive hearing. So with this second film, John really ran with that whole theme and started writing some of these places into the script, where cueing these places where, okay, let's, you know, switch into Regan's sonic envelope here. And so he wrote a lot of these places into the script. So we had a bit of a roadmap, which is something we didn't really have in the first movie. And also because we knew this was something that audiences could roll with and wasn't, you know, worked, we were able to sort of play with extending some of these moments to become longer and longer in this second movie. And we're also able to play more with the idea, because there's a lot more action in this movie, we were able to play with the idea of cutting out of these intense, you know, loud action scenes straight into Regan's sonic envelope of, you know, either near silence, you know, or total silence. And that, of course, gives an incredible amount of energy and dynamism to the movie, because, you know, these moments of just this incredible sonic contrast. So that was, in some ways, that's one area of this movie that we were really able to sort of dive deeper into that theme. And so that was incredibly fun for us.
Yeah, it seems like a very interesting challenge to have that contrast, because I mean, so many moments the tension is built out of almost the absence of sound. What's your process for creating those scenes? Does it take a lot of experimentation to get a sequence like that to work?
It's 100% experimentation from the very first day we start until the last few minutes of us finishing the movie and going hands off, our babies being birthed into the world. The entire process is experimentation. And it begins with Ethan and I first playing together. And I remember the first time we tried just taking out every single bit of sound, going to pure silence when Regan switches her earpiece off. And it gave us both goosebumps. It was just a surprise. And I think that's part of our process, is to try to surprise ourselves in ways and do something new just to give us that goosebump effect. And when we get those goosebumps, we know, okay, we're onto something, and how much further can we go with that? That's kind of the fun of it. And, and then the experimentation goes to the creatures. How do we create a creature without using an actual creature? You can use actual animal recordings in the real world. And that's what we kind of started with. We're thinking, okay, these creatures are essentially blind, but they have hypersensitive hearing, as Ethan mentioned. And they use sound to kind of navigate the geography of the world and to hunt. So we thought, what are real world analogs to creatures that use sound to hear? Echolocation, essentially. And we thought of bats, we thought of dolphins, beluga whales. And so we started using those recordings. But it was the right kind of direction, but it felt too recognizable. So then we started thinking, okay, what are other ways that we can create those kind of echolocation patterns? And we just happened to have a stun gun lying around the shop here, and that turned out to be what we used against grapes, because it conducts the electricity, and we could slow those sounds down and make them into patterns. And in part 2, we made all sorts of different patterns because we have more creatures and they're communicating over distances, and there's scenes where the whole feeling is that they're converging on the Abbott family. And so, we could basically use that type of experimentation to hone in closer and closer every day. And then, of course, John, super involved with sound, obsessed with sound. I mean, of course, sound is in the DNA of this story and the script. Sound is a character. Sound is the danger, but sound is also the weapon, which Regan, she kind of becomes the hero, learning to use this sonic weapon to help fend off creatures and ultimately, defeat some of them. But once John really got involved, then we dig in even deeper, and to the point where, the tiniest details we obsessed over. There's not one frame of this movie that we didn't try this or that or play with it to the very end. So.
It's I'm wondering, because you're talking about experimentation a lot, and it seems like John Krasinski is has thought through the soundscape very much. Were you able to sort of, through your experimentation, ever surprise him and give him something he hadn't mapped out, didn't expect that he used?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't think we've ever had that question before. And my immediate answer is, I'm sure there are places in the movie where we surprised him, and I'm not sure I can think of any off the top of my head.
Part of the challenge of answering this question is we were working remotely. He was in New York, we were in Los Angeles for the first big chunk of design time. So we couldn't be there watching his face when he heard something we'd done for the first time, which would have been really fun. Yeah. So by the time we were finally in the same city, he had already heard what we've been doing for a while and was ready with more ideas.
I think there are some, the idea of the sounds for the creature, and specifically the idea that they use echolocation in the form of these clicks, and they use it for communication, which is something, really that we explore more in part 2. I think that's something that, I don't want to speak for John, but I'm thinking that was, a bit of a surprise for him, because that's not something we sort of had discussed with him specifically up front. And so, it was just something we started playing with and then sent to him, and it seemed to get a good reaction and seemed to be working. So, but I think that was, maybe a little surprising, because it's pretty out of the box in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, you know, I wanted to make sure I talk about sort of the broader scope of your work too, before we go, because your resumes are huge. And we're talking about your great work in A Quiet Place Part 2, but just this year you also had Finch release, Jungle Cruise, Space Jam, Godzilla versus King Kong. And how do you sort of keep the unique aspects and identity of each project you're working on when it seems like you must just be in a constant stream of work?
Mhm.
Well, the fun thing for us is every movie is different, and every movie has its own context and its own soul, if you will. So I think the key for the process, at least for me, is to kind of find what that soul is and then start building it from the ground up. And I mean, we're both very lucky and also very, cursed is the wrong word, but we only do really kind of complicated sound movies. And that's what we love, because the sound is such an integral part of the storytelling. So I think, yeah, all the movies are kind of very diverse, but also very complicated, but kind of honing in on what can we do that is special and that is unique, and ideally that hasn't been done before. That's kind of the guiding light.
Yeah. Well, it's very impressive. Once again, you've terrified me through your use of sound with Quiet Place Part 2. So everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby and keep up to date with us throughout this season. And Erik, Ethan, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Cheers.
Thank you. Take care.